Welcome to Margaret Moorhead's Virtual Trunk Show. We're going to be going through a lot of different projects today, and you're going to get a brief explanation of how those projects were done. We'll be talking about a few techniques, but basically what I want you to do is grab yourself a glass of wine if you want, sit back, relax, and be inspired. Start over here with our Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble. The Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble is from the Virtual Success 1 series, which is one of my online classes. The first project is this beautiful towel wrap. Now this towel wrap is dead set easy, but extremely elegant. So the first thing we'll talk about is how to make the band. The band is comprised of a whatever width fabric you want that has batting on the back. And then the binding is what's really cool on this. What you'll do is you'll take a piece of fabric that is as wide as your band, plus enough to create the binding, plus enough for a little bit of a hem on the back. You'll stitch your binding fabric or your faux binding fabric along the top, flip it up, that's what gives you your binding, bring it all the way down the back, and then you'll hem it. But before you hem it, you're going to go ahead and add some beautiful prairie points. These are created with the Quick Point Prairie Point ruler, and this is a 1.5 inch prairie point. Then you'll embellish it using the beautiful embroidery decoupage technique. These designs are from Margaret's Magnificent Melody, and that's the same design pack that we're going to be using on all of the projects from the Bedroom Bouquet. So let me just set this down here, and we'll move on to project number 2. Now, project number 2 is a wonderful cushion, and it has a lot of similarities to the towel wrap that you saw. It has the prairie points, it has the embroidery decoupage, and it's dead set easy. So on this one, what we did was we added background stitches. And I encourage you to use tone-on-tone stitches if you haven't done a lot of background stitching. So embellish your background fabric, add some prairie points, and do your embroidery decoupage to create this beautiful cushion. Then all you have to do is add a contrast fabric to each side. So very easy to do. Now I don't know about you, but I love to change up my home decor. But I can't always find decorator fabric that I want to make the cushions out of, and I don't always want to make a whole cushion. So I love this little cushion because it's made out of a plain cotton fabric, but to give that fabric some body and to give it a more elegant and expensive look, what I did was I fused that plain cotton fabric with Jenny's Quilt Magic to make sure that it had some body. Then let's talk about the wrap in the center. This is created from that same cream silk fabric that we used on our other projects, and it's got the beautiful decorative stitches in there. But what's really cool is this little binding technique. So to do the binding technique, you have your rectangle of fabric, and you're going to take your binding and stitch it on the wrong side. So you'll stitch however wide you want that binding to be. Stitch, then you'll flip it out and over to the front and press it. Then you go back to the back side, stitch in the ditch, and when you look at the front side, you'll have a row of straight stitching here and you'll have some extra fabric. Then what you can do is trim away the excess fabric and seal that raw edge with this beautiful stitch right here. Then all you have left to do to create this beautiful project is to go ahead and embellish it with your designs from Margaret's Magnificent Melody and use your embroidery decoupage technique. Now again, when I'm doing embroidery decoupage, I go ahead and use free motion, and I use monofilament in the needle and just a regular bobbin thread in the bobbin. Another fun project to do is this beautiful little foot warmer. So I'm going to leave it sitting over here because I think it'll be a little bit easier to photograph. But basically we've got a couple different techniques going on this. We have embroidered directly on the fabric, which is the scrolls. We have embroidery we have embroidery decoupage on the flowers. We've got the Jenny join, and we have the same binding technique that we just talked about. So let's go ahead and look at each of these individually. Here, like I said, we've done the scrolls directly on the fabric. So you'll decide on your placement and embroider the scrolls directly on the fabric, then do your embroidery decoupage on top of those. Here I have 4 scrolls. You can see 3 of them probably. The 4th one is up here. Embroider it directly on the fabric, add your embroidery decoupage. This is 2 scrolls, and the scrolls are from Gracious Impressions, or you can get them in the Heritage book. So 2 scrolls, 4 scrolls, and if we look down here, it's kind of hard to see, but there's 1 scroll here with the point down here, and then I have 2 scrolls up here. 1, 2. So it created a large triangle shape. Once all that was finished, then I went ahead and put my embroidery decoupage on it. Now let's talk about the quilting on this, and I hope it shows up okay on the camera. We've got 2 different types of quilting going on. We have a grid quilt with a decorative stitch, and we have free motion McTavishing. So what we want to do is talk a little bit about how we got this far. You go ahead and do all of your embroidery, then put your backing fabric on it and do the quilting, and then you can add embroidery decoupage, or you can do all your embroidery directly on the fabric, then add your embroidery decoupage and quilt around it. Either way is correct. It's totally up to you. But basically what you want is you want to have 3 pieces or 3 sections when you're finished that are all finished except assembly. So you'll have the bottom piece, there's another top piece way up there, and the center piece, and they're completely quilted together. Then we're going to go ahead and do the Jenny join. Now this is a Jenny join right here, and I want to give you a brief explanation or a quick explanation on how to do this. This is quilted, completely finished. You're going to butt them together right up next to each other so they're just touching. Then you're going to do a zigzag, so one swing of the needle is on this fabric, one on this fabric. This. These directions can be found in several of Jenny's magazines and in some of her books, so just a quick explanation. Once they're zigzagged together, then take whatever color thread you want, and in this case I used a cream color thread and I did a satin stitch, and that makes the Jenny join very strong. After I did the satin stitch, to add a little bit more detail, I did a decorative stitch on top of that satin stitch, again strengthening the bond, the way these two are held together. Then the last thing I did, and these are really hard to see, but there's a little row of circle stitches, satin circle stitches underneath it, and a row of satin circle stitches above it. So just a beautiful way to go ahead and put your projects together. And the benefit of doing this is that you're working with small sections, so they're much easier to quilt. And you have no bulk in the seam because there is no overlap of anything. So a fun little project to do. And then, like I said, the binding technique on this is the same technique that we used on this little cushion here. Now let's move on to this little wall hanging. And this was a fun wall hanging to do. So you can see it's got a lot of different things going on, and we're going to start at the center. So just a brief overview, we've got the center, which is combined pieces of embroidery using Fabricadabra. Then we've got our little sashing, and it has some free motion on it. We've got some crinkling or scrunching. We've got some jumbo rickrack, and then we've got the binding. And in the corners, we have another form of scrunching or crinkling. So let's go ahead and talk about how we got the center embroidery done. When you're doing this, I have 4 different sections, and I have 4 different pieces of fabric that I'm working with. So the first thing you're going to do is hoop your piece of fabric Put as many of the designs from Fabric Cadabra in the hoop that you can and stitch them out. The last thing to stitch is a cutting line. So right outside here would be a straight stitch, which is your cutting line. So you stitch so you have 4 of these, you'll stitch so you have 4 of these, and you'll stitch so you have 4 of these, and of course 4 of these. You'll then cut on the cutting line and stitch them together. No measuring, nothing. Cut on the cutting line, do a 1/4 inch seam, and it will go together perfect for you. Then what you'll do for this project is you'll have 4 blocks, and you'll stitch those 4 blocks together in a pleasing arrangement. When I put mine together, I made sure I always had them in the same order and then just rotated them to form the design. Once that's finished, add your borders. When that's finished, you'll add your scrunching. Now when I did the scrunching, I used a technique that I learned from Linda McGee. And this was where you took your fabric and you kind of pleated it up. Okay, so if you think of a fan fold, and I'll demo one here, we'll improvise. So I took my fabric and I just kind of fan folded it like this. Then if you think back to when you use a beach towel, if it's got tons and tons of water in it, how you twist and you twist, so this hand is twisting this way and this is this way, you're twisting it all together. Then you'll go ahead and wrap it with rubber bands, put it in water, get it all wet. You start with wet fabric. So you go ahead and start with the wet fabric, fan fold it, rubber band it together, and then dry it. When it's finished, you'll kind of open it out and fuse it to an interfacing. It could be a knit interfacing, it could be Jenny Sheer Magic, it could be Jenny Sheer Magic Plus. You want to fuse it down so that it keeps the wrinkles in it. If you don't fuse it down, there's no way for these wrinkles to stay in there. When doing this technique, you want to use an all-natural fiber if you can. So this is cotton. Then what I did was I went ahead and I just put some embellishments on top of it. This is all done with couching, but you could use decorative stitches if you want it. Once you have this large piece the way you want it, then you'll cut it and add it to your project. The next thing is this jumbo rickrack. The jumbo rickrack is really very fun because do you know what? It's actually the same technique as when we made the prairie points. So you'll use your quick point ruler, but instead of folding it over to make prairie points, you'll leave it big, you'll leave it open to make the jumbo rickrack. And when you get the prairie point ruler, all the directions are in there for doing the prairie points or the jumbo ruler or the jumbo rickrack. And this is with the 2-inch quick points ruler. So this is 2-inch. The other ones we talked about were 1.5 inches. And then let's look lastly at our corner blocks. The corner blocks use Jenny's Crinkle Magic. And when these were done, basically all we did was stitch a grid. So we went diagonal in one direction, then diagonal in the other direction. And in doing that, I just couched down a piece of the gold glamour or candlelight thread. So you have your layer of silk, you have your Crinkle Magic behind it, couch down your decorative thread, or you could just use a regular straight stitch. When that's all finished, you take your iron and you steam it, and the steam makes your flat silk and Crinkle Magic bunch up to create that wonderful texture on this little corner. So a lot of fun things on this little wall hanging, plus lots of fun things on the other techniques that we've talked about. So lots to keep you going. Before we move over to the other side of the room, I do want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about what we have here. These projects were from the boot camp, which is Virtual Success 4. And the first thing we'll talk about is the little candle wrap. It's made with a sheer fabric, and this was just a little design that if you were in boot camp, you went ahead and got the design as part of the boot camp. So it's a sheer fabric here, it's got a silk overlay, and you put this around your candle and just tie it with ribbons on the back. So a fun little thing, and this is one of those battery operated candles, so it's a lot of fun to have out, and you can just turn it on off, and there's even some that come on timers, so they're a lot of fun to have. The other thing that you see here is a little frame that's been made into a tray and some coasters. The design for the coasters was actually part of the class also, but I'm sure you've seen these before, where you have a circle of fabric and then you have two circles that have been folded in half, and they're stitched around using your embroidery machine and a decorative stitch around the edge. And you don't even need an embroidery machine. You could do those with decorative stitches. Then I love the idea of taking a frame and making it into a tray. So we've got a regular picture frame, we added handles to it, and instead of putting a picture in it, we've put an embroidery in there. So on this one you can see that we've put our rows of decorative stitches. We've got two different decorative stitches going on here. We've got a little, kind of like a crosshatch one, and then in between every other one of those we have a different decorative stitch. So it just gives you a different look, more of a plaid effect. Then in the corners we've used an embroidery design from Beyond Color Purple by Jenny Haskins. And all that was done to get the placement and everything. We used our template magic and some printouts from the computer, made sure it was all the way we wanted to, made sure that it looked the way we wanted it to look, and then went ahead and did our embroidery project. So let's go ahead and move on to some of the things on the other side of the room. If you haven't noticed by now, I love purple. So we've got another little cushion over here, and this was part of the Virtual Success Boot Camp, which is the same class that we did the tray and the coasters and the candle wrap in. This little cushion was inspired by Jenny's heritage book. So there was a cushion or quilt block that was very similar to this. So what I decided to do was go ahead and create my own background fabric. These backgrounds are from a design CD called Grand Beginnings. And Grand Beginnings happens to be a design CD that I put out. So I went ahead and I stitched backgrounds and cut them into sizes I wanted. And you can see that they're all the same width, but these three are larger in height than these three. So you can design it any way you want. I just wanted it to be a little bit asymmetrical. Now the design CD that I used for this is the same one that we used from the tray, and that is Beyond Color Purple. So these designs are put on using embroidery decoupage, and they're from Beyond Color Purple. The other technique that's on this cushion is the beautiful Jenny join. And I think this, when you see this, it might be easier for you to see the stitching for the Jenny join. So a quick review, I butted these two together, no seam allowance, just butted together, zigzagged it together. Then I went over it with the purple satin stitch. On top of the purple satin stitch, that's kind of hard to say, is a little decorative stitch. And on each side of that, excuse me, is a little circle stitch. So it looks like a piece of braid or something has been added to this. However, it's not a braid. It's all done with your stitching. And the great thing about that is we have a million colors of thread, but we have a limited supply of braid in our sewing room sometimes. So just a beautiful little cushion that utilizes scraps of fabric and creates a beautiful, beautiful accent to our home. If we look over to the right here, we have what Jenny calls a doorstop. This project was featured in one of her Creative Expressions magazine, and it's basically a little purse doorstop that has embroidery decoupage on it. Now in her magazine, she used a different embroidery design, but to coordinate the little doorstop with the cushion and the tray, I went ahead and used the same Beyond Color Purple Design CD. So just a fun little accent, and as you can see, it doesn't have to be used as a doorstop. It can certainly just be used as an accent on a table. Now let's go ahead and talk about the beautiful table topper and the candles that you see over here. Now the table topper is also part of the Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble, but we're going to start at the top with our candles. The candles have some beautiful wraps around them. The design for the wrap comes from the Rosebud Design CD, and the embroidery is done on a sheer organza, nylon organza fabric. I stitched out a lot of the designs and then threaded them on a ribbon. The candle on the left of your screen has 3 of the medallions around it. So you can see that there's quite a bit of space between each medallion. I just slid the ribbon on through the buttonholes and put them onto my candle. The candle on the right has the same medallion embroidery on it. However, there are 4 medallions that go around that candle. So they are very, very similar. However, they are not identical. And that's what makes your decorating interesting. Now let's go down to the table topper. This was a very, very easy project to do. Cut yourself a circle and then embellish with the embroidery decoupage technique. So those are all individual embroideries from Margaret's Magnificent Melody that have been stitched around the bottom edge of a piece of fabric that has a serged edge. Very quick and easy to do, and as you can see, the flowers do extend beyond the edge of the tablecloth, so I didn't have to cut anything away. Now if we go down just a little bit further, we're going to see a little rug or a bath mat, again part of the Bedroom Bouquet Ensemble, and those are just embroidery decoupage again, and you could go ahead and stitch those on, or you could do just what I did and you could simply go ahead and glue those in place. So lots of things that you can do. Now you might have seen a little peek of a green and pink quilt that was featured in Jenny Sharman Vintage Garden book. It was a quilt that I did for her, and it was really a lot of fun to do. This quilt has twin needlework on it, piped prairie points, embroidery, and free motion, and of course piecing. The designs can be found in Sharman's Vintage Garden book, and I want to talk about the green texturized fabric that you see there first. What I did was I took a large piece of green fabric, a 2mm twin needle, and a decorative stitch that some people might refer to as a serpentine stitch. I stitched rows and rows of that stitch using the twin needle going in one direction. After I filled up that piece of fabric, I turned it 90 degrees and stitched the same stitch perpendicular to the first rows. Then I had this beautiful texturized fabric which was used around all of the blocks. So let's go ahead and focus on one block and talk about how to create these. The first thing you'll do is take your background fabric, and in my case it was a piece of cream fabric, and I simply centered an embroidery on that block and stitched it out. Next, you'll want to add the beautiful piped prairie points, and at the end of this video you'll see step-by-step directions on how to create those. Then you'll take that beautiful texturized fabric and piece triangles of it to create your entire square. Once you've created the square, you can go ahead and work on the center, and when I did the center, I went ahead and took 4 of those squares and stitched them together to create that large center medallion. There's sashing around the center medallion, there's some beautiful hydrangea fabric, and then the 4 corners are individual blocks. So again, this quilt was really just a lot of fun to do. I love adding texture to the quilts, and that again was done with the beautiful twin needle work. So if you don't have Sherman's Vintage Garden, go ahead and pick up a copy of it, or take this idea and make your own quilt using the same techniques that I did. What we're going to do now is move on to the next section of our trunk show, where you're going to see lots more beautiful projects. See you in a minute. Welcome back to the Virtual Trunk Show. In this segment, we're going to be talking about a version of Harvey's Garden quilt, couching, faux crazy patch, faux knitting, a little girl's purse, some little sachets that make great gifts, and some more about embroidery decoupage. So let's get started with this little scrappy wall hanging. When creating this scrappy wall hanging, I did have a goal in mind. My goal was to utilize things that I had left over in my sewing room. I had a lot of strips of cream silk that had been fused with Jenny's Quilt Magic batting, and I had a lot of pink silk strips that had been fused with Jenny's Quilt Magic batting, and they were embellished with the design from Grand Beginnings. These were pieced together to create the border. Also in my sewing room were a lot of pieces of embroidery decoupage. So to create a canvas to do this embroidery decoupage on, a piece of cream silk was embellished with a decorative stitch and a wing needle. A grid was formed in the background, and then a frame was added around that. To add the frame, you simply take a rectangle of floral fabric, cut out the inside in the shape that you desire for your frame, fuse it on top of your cream fabric that has the wing needle work, and seal the raw edges with a decorative stitch. Now you're ready to begin doing your embroidery decoupage. On this project, there are 3 types of embroidery decoupage. The first one that you see here is just typical embroidery decoupage. It is from Floral Rhapsody, and this flower was stitched out when I was creating a quilt wall hanging called Steel Magnolias. The next type of embroidery decoupage is the leaf that you see. This leaf is from Floral Applique Magic, and it utilizes an applique technique in addition to embroidery decoupage. So the main part of this leaf utilizes a green silk, and then the embroidery stitches for the vein and the shading are added. The third type of embroidery decoupage is a 3D technique. 2 flowers are stitched out. They can both be organza. One can be organza, one can be silk. They could both be silk, it's your choice. Layer them together, put some batting between the 2 flowers in the center, stitch around the center to hold them together, and then decoupage them onto your project. When you do this technique, you get a lot of dimension, and it really adds to your project. So all the other flowers and leaves were stitched around the entire outside edge, but the little flowers that consist of more than 1 layer are simply stitched around their center. Once all those are stitched in place, your project is basically done. Just add your border and enjoy. Let's move on to this beautiful cushion that utilizes stitch building or stitch stacking, faux crazy patch, the Jenny join, embroidery from Robin's Romance, and even some fringe. Now when you're working on this cushion, you'll start by doing your embroidery and sectioning it off to create the faux crazy patch. Then in this section here, what we've done is the stitch building technique. We've taken a wide satin stitch in purple, stitched on top of it in a tan, and on each side of it in a tan, which is known as stitch building or stitch stacking. This mauve color thread is what we use to create the Jenny join. So we've got our pieces of fabric joined together, and that joining stitch is covered with a satin stitch and then embellished on one side with a scallop. When we talk about faux crazy patch, what we mean is that we've got one piece of base fabric and then we've fused other fabric on top of that, making it look like we've pieced it together in a faux crazy patch technique, where in reality all we've done is fused fabric down and then embellished it. This little section here in pink that you see is actually a separate piece of fabric that was embellished by stitching out the design from Grand Beginnings and then fused down on top of our base fabric. All of these sections that are fused down are then stitched, the raw edges are then stitched over with a decorative stitch. And the last thing we do is add some beautiful fringe to each edge to make this cushion one of a kind and one you'll love to have in your home. The background design on this little black velvet purse is from Grand Beginnings by Margaret Moorhead, and it's stitched in a gold metallic thread. The front design is actually from Twin Needle Shadow Work by Machine by Jenny Haskins. It's one design repeated 2 times so that it creates this beautiful oval. You'll enjoy making this simple little purse for your favorite little girl, and they'll certainly enjoy carrying it. To create this beautiful background fabric for this cushion, you'll need yarn and water-soluble sticky stabilizer. What you'll do is sandwich rows and rows of yarns between 2 layers of the water-soluble sticky stabilizer, stitch it together using free motion or rows of stitching about a 1/2 inch apart, rinse away the stabilizer, fuse the yarn that now looks like it's been knitted together to Sheer Magic or Sheer Magic Plus, and then treat it as you would any other piece of delicate fabric and create the beautiful cushion, scarf, shirt, whatever you want to create utilizing this technique. The flower that you see here that's been put on using the embroidery decoupage technique is from Lottie's Poppies. Now let's move on to these 2 adorable little cushions that are simple, simple, simple. And if you put little lavender inside of it, what a great gift. Their simplicity is enhanced by the beautiful beads that are inserted into the seam when you create this. It's simply one design stitched on a piece of fabric. This design is from Jenny Haskins' Victorian Pansies. Again, it's just on one little square of fabric and it's got the beads around the outside. The other cushion that you see here on the left is also stitched on one little square of silk fabric. It has the beads inserted in the seam, and this design is from Jenny Haskins' Victorian Pansies. Make up a bunch of these and use them as little gifts, and you will be the favorite gift giver this year. This beautiful little cushion makes a great Valentine's Day gift. It's very similar to the cushion we saw in the first segment of our virtual trunk show, but it does have some differences. We have prairie points on this one, however, these prairie points are very small. They utilize the 1-inch Quick Points prairie point ruler, where the other ones utilize the 1.5 inch. The design in the center is done embroidery decoupage, and the heart design is from Charmin's Vintage Garden. The design that you see down here at the bottom is from Simon's Terrific Trims, or you can get it from Fabricadabra also. All of this is embroidery decoupage except for the stitches in the background that you see, which were tone on tone. Enjoy this little cushion when you make it for yourself. Now let's look at this 9-block version of Harvey's Garden. This quilt is completely put together using the Jenny Join. It has 5 embroidered blocks from the Harvey's Garden Design Collection and 4 blocks that are simply pieced together using fairy frost fabric and a heart in the center. So let's go ahead and look at some of the designs that were embroidered out. When Jenny digitized this, she digitized them as applique. We've got the wonderful snails, the caterpillars, the mushrooms, the flowers, the spiders, the ladybugs, and we also have embroidered directly on the fabric the spider web and some other flowers. This block is one that, like I said, is simply pieced together using fairy frost, and a heart is stitched with a straight stitch, and then a decorative stitch is put on top of that straight stitch. Here we have another applique design. You can see again the beautiful ladybug, the little mushroom house, the snail, the clouds. Absolutely beautiful designs that Jenny has done. Now when I had all of my blocks created, I went ahead and did the Jenny Join. So I zigzagged them together, and then I put a piece of rose color silk over that and did a decorative stitch to seal the raw edge. Then I put a piece of ribbon on top of that rose color fabric and did a decorative stitch down each side of that ribbon. And that is how I covered all of my seams on the Jenny Join. I love the way it turned out. It's got a lot of interest because you have the polka dot ribbon and the solid fabric behind it. As you can see, I did put a corner block in the border section in each corner, and I did extend the ribbon out past the 9 block section and into the borders. The original design that Jenny did not have the words "shh, baby sleeping." I took this block into my software and edited it so that my words say "shh, baby sleeping" instead of Harvey's Garden. So you could personalize your quilt in any manner that you would like to make it fit your needs. So again, just a beautiful quilt. The beautiful fairy frost fabrics combined with the silk and the polka dot make this a quilt that every little boy or girl would love to have. Take your time, use up some of your fabric scraps, and enjoy making this quilt. You'll also find on the design CD that there's a book that can be stitched out that has these blocks plus blocks and blocks of words so that you can read this story to your child, or as your child gets older, they would be able to read the story to themselves. So enjoy making Harvey's Garden, and if you're up to it, make the book also. But no matter what you do, enjoy the process. This little wall hanging was really a lot of fun to do. It's the second one I created. The first one was called Steel Magnolias and was featured in one of Jenny Haskins' Creative Expressions magazines. So what you're going to do is start with a square of fabric, draw a grid on it, and use your cording foot, monofilament thread in the needle, and some beautiful threads to couch down on those drawn lines. Go ahead and couch all of your threads down, and then you're going to cut that square of fabric into a circle. Once you have it cut into a circle, you will go ahead and fuse that onto the center square of your quilt project. Once that's fused on, go ahead and go around the edge and seal that raw edge with a zigzag stitch. Doesn't have to be a satin stitch, but a zigzag stitch. Then go to your embroidery machine, stitch out a whole lot of flowers from Floral Rhapsody, and lay them down on your project until you have them the way you want. Use your monofilament thread in the needle again and stitch down all of those flowers. I used a free motion technique when I did that, and I made sure that the raw edge of my circle was covered by the flowers. Once that was done, go ahead and create your wall hanging in any fashion you want. I put a little faux border around the square that I pieced triangles in the corner. I put another border that was cut on the bias on the outside of that. I put a little trim between the triangles and the border, and I put bias binding on to complete the quilt. So go ahead and enjoy your project, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about what a difference color can make on your projects. See you in a little bit. See, I've changed my display just a little bit. I promised you that we would be talking about colors, so I went ahead and added a second wall hanging to this. Now, when I was talking about this wall hanging first, I told you that it actually was the second wall hanging that I had made, and that the first one was steel magnolias. So I've gone ahead and added steel magnolias here, so you can look at both of these at one time and see that we have the same basic wall hanging, but they're done in different color palettes. And another difference on this is that on steel magnolias, the black and white one, in the corners I've added a little bit more embroidery. So again, just a few different changes, the main change being our color palette. Now, oftentimes when you look at something, you may think, oh, I love that, or oh, not so much, I don't like that very much. Sometimes I can't distinguish if I don't like it because of the color, or I don't like it because of the style, or I don't like it because of the texture. So I wanted to just show you one more example of how color can change, and it's with this little cushion. I know that some people may hate pink and purple, so when you see this cushion, you may think, oh my gosh, I don't like that at all. But if you were to see it in a different color palette, it might be more appealing to you. So what I have here is a more neutral color palette and the definite color palette of pink and purple. So go ahead and experiment with your colors. Enjoy making the decisions on what color palette you want to do, and enjoy the process of creating new and exciting projects. Well, this little doily makes a wonderful gift. I love the doily because it has a nice clean finish on the back. So let me go ahead and explain how you can make this. First, you'll take a piece of fabric and embroider a design from the Rosebud CD collection from Jenny Haskins. Then cut very close to the stitched design. Get another piece of matching fabric and cut your circle out. Then if it has a grain like mine does, make sure your grain is lined up. Center the embroidery in the center of your project and stitch it down. You can stitch it down with a straight stitch and then with a wing needle, or if you're comfortable, you can just use a wing needle. Once that's finished, serge the edges and turn the edge under and stitch it, and then go ahead and attach your lace using the wing needle. Now when you're doing this, you'll need to do a little bit of cutting of your lace to make the lace fit around the circle to create this nice doily. Another doily right here, same idea, just a different color and a different lace. On both of these doilies, the lace has been dyed to make it blend with the project. So again, just a quick overview. Stitch out your embroidery design, and this is from the Rosebud Design CD by Jenny Haskins. I laid it on top of another piece of fabric and stitched it down with the wing needle. I serged the edge of my circle, turned it under, and stitched it down and I also attached the lace. And then I did a decorative stitch with the wing needle to make this just the perfect little project, either for yourself or as a gift. Another great gift are placemats and napkins. Now these placemats I went ahead and made, but you could use purchased placemats if you wanted. Go ahead and get a placemat and embellish it with some embroidery decoupage. The little flower in the corner here is from Lottie's Poppies, and like I said, it's just embroidery decoupage and stitched down. Then you might want to make some coordinating napkins. These napkins have a beautiful mitered corner, which you're going to get to see exactly how to do that later in this video in the technique section. And it has a wonderful decorative stitch that utilizes the wing needle. So I guess I was in a wing needle mood when I was doing these projects. So just fun little gifts that you can make, and everybody loves a placemat and napkin, especially if it's a holiday theme. Another thing I love to do is to embellish a photo album or a book for someone. So this is a photo album, and these were leftover designs that I had done from other projects. I simply glued them onto the photo album. This is from Lottie's Poppies. This is from Grand Beginnings. All of these, I think, are from Lottie's Poppies. Then I even had some leftover prairie points from a project, and I glued those down. But the top of the prairie points didn't have a really nice edge, so I went ahead and added a piece of purchased trim to that edge to give it a nice finished look. Now when you're gift giving, or even for yourself, sometimes you want something with a little more sentiment. When I was young, we had this dictionary, and I don't know why it has so much sentimental value to me, but it does. And I couldn't get rid of it when it was time to go through and get rid of some things. I just couldn't get rid of it. So what I did was I embellished this. It took a flower from Floral Rhapsody and stitched it out in my favorite color, purple. Then used ribbon to create a beautiful bow, put a butterfly from Butterflies for Catherine on it, and tied it all together. The spine was in really bad shape and I wasn't sure what to do with it, so I covered it with ribbon first, and then I took some of the prairie points that weren't folded in half yet, so it's really a jumbo rickrack. There's one piece here, there's another piece underneath it, and I simply glued those on to make the spine look a little bit better. So again, use a new book, use a sentimental book, whatever you want to do, but just be creative and start making some wonderful gifts. Next, we're going to move on to some of these other beautiful things. Feel like pampering yourself a little bit? Got the perfect idea for you. These slippers are showcased in Jenny's Creative Expressions magazine, and on the version that I have done here, I've used the Design CD Beyond Color Purple. So these actually start with a pair of inner soles that you put in your shoes. So quick and easy to do, and believe it or not, they're really very comfortable. You might not want to stop with just a pair of slippers. You might want to go ahead and make a cute little sleeping mask. Oh, upside down. So here I just drew a sleeping mask. I think I might have traced it off of one that I got on the plane or something. Took a layer of fabric, a layer of Quilt Magic, and another layer of fabric, fused them all together, put binding around it, added 2 strips of elastic, and then embellished using embroidery decoupage and again the Beyond Color Purple CD. You don't need to quit there. You can go ahead and make this into a wonderful trio. This is just a little cushion that could go by a bed. It could be filled with lavender. It just is an accent. The design used here is from the Rosebud Design CD from Jenny Haskins, and it's done on a sheer organza. So all I did was stitch this out, remove the excess organza using Jenny's heat tool, stitched it down to my project. The cord is created by twisting threads using your bobbin winder, and then a nice little ribbon is added as an accent. So a beautiful little spa trio that you can use for yourself, or wouldn't it be great in a guest room to supply your guests with a beautiful little trio that they could take home? Over here, we have in our Christmas fabric, Jenny's Market Bag. This is a great project for you to make for yourself or again as a gift. It's a wonderful size. There's two different patterns on there, two different styles that you can make from the one pattern. Like I said, I chose to do this in Christmas colors, and it's embellished with the designs from Lottie's Poppies. Goes together really quick and easy, has a little snap at the top, makes a great little carry-all, whether for Christmas or for any other season of the year, or could be for a beach tote, could be for anything. And we've got this nice little cushion here. I love this cushion because there's a lot of things on here. We have the beautiful prairie points that are created using the quilt point ruler, the Quick Points ruler, and this is a 1.5-inch prairie point. The center is embellished with embroidery decoupage, and it might be hard to see, but it has a little bit of twin needle work in the background. So it's a grid that's formed using a twin needle. The fabric was first fused with Jenny's Quilt Magic, then the grid was stitched on with the twin needle, then it was embellished with the embroidery decoupage. You'll go ahead and add your prairie points, maybe a little bit of sashing, and you'll have a beautiful ruffle created in a unique way. This is a faux binding technique. So you'll stitch your red piece of fabric to your yellow piece of fabric. When you fold it back, so that's your stitching line, you fold it back. This is your seam allowance in here, and then the yellow extends all the way to the back. So you're finishing the top of your ruffle, you're adding a faux binding, and creating a beautiful project. Now you don't need to stop there. You could go ahead and create this beautiful wall hanging. This wall hanging is entitled Cantini Continues, and it utilizes two different design CDs. We've got the flowers from Lottie's Poppies, and we've got the hearts from the design collection that I put out called Cantini. So all of these hearts are embroidered directly on the fabric, and they use the applique technique. So red silk, black fabric applique, and a cream color thread. Then up here, these hearts are stitched on a sheer organza fabric and put onto the silk using the embroidery decoupage technique. All of the flowers are embroidery decoupage. So the only embroidery that you do directly on the silk are the hearts in the 4 center blocks. Add some sashing, do some quilting, put a beautiful border on it, and finish with your wonderful binding. So I hope you enjoyed these great gift ideas, whether they're for your Christmas season, for yourself, or for a friend. Happy creating!